Prices seem very objective and rational on the surface, but so many small and seemingly irrelevant factors, like fonts, colors, digits, can influence the perception of prices and persuade customers to buy. I wrote a popular guide that summarizes these principles, which you can download for free. I'll put the link below. In this video, we'll apply those principles. We'll start with a blank canvas, and we'll build a pricing page so that you can see all of these subconscious psychological effects that play a role in pricing. Let's start with the page layout and the pricing plans. First, color. For pricing pages, you should typically reduce the color as much as possible. Color has weight, and in the context of pricing, weight is a bad thing. You want these prices to feel as light as possible, so use a lot of white and light colors on your page. Next, quantity. How many pricing plans should you offer? When possible, show no more than 3 to 4 options. There's a principle called FINST, which stands for Fingers of Instantiation. If you see 3 dots that are moving, your brain can keep track of all of these motion paths simultaneously. It's more difficult when you add a 4th dot, but it's still feasible and possible for most people. However, once you add a 5th dot, your attention collapses. So the takeaway is that you can only keep track of 4 objects simultaneously. In your pricing page, customers can easily compare 3 to 4 options. But as soon as you add that 5th option, their attention collapses, and they need to start comparing plans by viewing a subset of plans and then viewing another subset while keeping the previous plans in working memory. Next, location. Where should you position the plans? You should typically place them near the top of the page. When people click to go to a pricing page, they expect to see prices. So you should show these prices immediately after the page loads. If they don't see prices after the page loads, it can feel somewhat jarring, as if they went to the wrong page. And you should also center these plans in the middle. Thanks to the central fixation bias, it's just easier to compare plans and options when they're in the middle. But what if you can't center them? Should you place them on the left or the right? It's a little tricky. If you're displaying prices just by themselves with no ability to choose one of these options, then you should place them on the left. Our brain perceives the left side of a design to be a visual fulcrum. In other words, if prices appear further away toward the right, they just feel heavier, as if they're on a teeter-totter pulling downward, and so they just feel more expensive. But let's say that customers need to choose a plan. Here, our choices are influenced by the dominance of our hand. Right-handed people are more likely to choose options on the right, while left-handed people choose options on the left. Subconsciously, these locations just feel easier for us to choose an option because of our physical ability, so our brain misconstrues this ease for a desire. So if you need to place your plans on one side or the other, the right side might be more effective just because you'll be catering to right-handed people, which are a larger percentage of the population. Now, we talked about the locations of these plans, but what about the prices inside these plans? Should they be toward the top or the bottom? I would argue the top. In a study with food packaging, cookies seemed heavier when they appeared toward the bottom. If they appeared higher on the package, it felt like they were lifted to this location. And if they were lifted to this location, naturally, the cookies must be lighter, so they looked like diet cookies. Same thing might happen with prices. They might feel lighter toward the top, as if they were lifted to this location, so naturally, they must be lighter. Next, distance. Generally, you should bring plans closer together. In one study, researchers filled one bag with the prize. Then, when they asked people to choose a bag, they preferred choosing from assortments in which the bags were closer together. This layout caused them to visually group these bags. So if one bag contained a prize, subconsciously, it felt like all of these bags contained that prize because their brain was grouping this cluster as a single unit. And same thing can happen with pricing plans. If these plans are close together, customers will group all of these plans as a unit. Subconsciously, it feels like they'll be receiving the benefits from all of these plans. But you need to be careful. If your cheapest option feels equivalent to your most expensive option, then you might discourage people from buying a more expensive plan. So be sure to test this. Now, we talked about shortening the spatial distance between plans, but you can also shorten the distance between these plans and the user. You might want to insert something subtle in the background so that your plans become part of the foreground. If users perceive these plans to be physically closer, it just feels easier to choose one of these options. And if it feels easier to choose, then users will be more likely to do it. Perhaps you could insert something like clouds in the background. This might trigger a feeling of lightness that gets attributed to the prices. Next, height. You should constrain these plans to the same height. And here's why. I'll show you 2 pictures. Each picture depicts an emotion. And I want you to name these 2 emotions as fast as possible. Both images were the same dimensions and person, so your answer was quicker because your brain could hold all of these variables constant. The only element that was different was the emotion. But if these images were two different people with different dimensions, these other variables would have competed for your attention, slowing down your comparison. And same with prices. You should keep planes the same height so that the intrinsic semantic differences will be easier to notice and compare. Next, the names of plans. Generally, you should enlarge and bold the plan names. You want their attention on what they're receiving rather than the cost that they'll be paying. Next, sequence. In which order should you arrange these plans? In one study, a restaurant increased their revenue by listing beer prices from most expensive to least expensive. When people read these prices, the first few items established a higher reference price, which in turn made these subsequent prices seem cheaper. Unfortunately, we can't really do this with pricing pages. If your culture reads from left to right, then you conceptualize numbers as getting larger from left to right. So your pricing page needs to adhere to this left to right sequence. However, we can still apply this same principle. It's not the sequence that matters, it's the order in which people evaluate plans. So we can accomplish that same effect by visually distinguishing the most expensive plan. If customers view this most expensive price first, then this number establishes a higher reference price that will make the subsequent prices seem cheaper. Or if you don't want to highlight an expensive price, you could achieve the same effect by showing a random high number nearby. Next, there's usually a button at the bottom of plans, and you should think about inserting a very thin line above this button. Without this line, customers will group this button with the rest of the plan. This button will consume a smaller percentage of their attention. Adding this line will isolate this button. When users contemplate clicking this button, all of their attention will be consolidated in this location rather than being shared with the elements above. And here's a bonus trick. You could also insert a texture nearby, like lines or dots. In one study, when people viewed tears in cloth, their arm muscles became activated, as if they were the ones who were making these tears. Whenever we see a texture, our brain simulates the physical sensation of touching this texture. In your page, if you can activate the hand muscles of customers while they contemplate this decision, they might become more likely to choose a plan. Now that we discussed the page layout, let's tackle the prices inside these plans. Digits. Which numbers should you choose? It depends on their motive. Round numbers work better for emotional purchases, while precise numbers work better for rational purchases. Pricing pages will usually have a rational motive, but we can't really show highly precise numbers without cluttering this design. Instead, we should take a round price like $50 and reduce the left digit. This new price is called a charm price. When people read $49, they start encoding this price before they reach the end of it, so it feels closer to $40. Many other factors play a role with digits, like whether odd or even, the number of syllables, the visual directionality of digits. You can refer to my PDF for all of those other ideas. Next, visual size. Prices seem more expensive in a larger font size. Customers misattribute this visual size to a numerical size. How big is this price? Something feels big, so the price must be big. But this effect can be tricky. Sometimes this visual size can be misattributed to a more favorable type of size. Suppose that somebody arrives on a pricing page and they know what the actual price should be. In this scenario, they're not necessarily evaluating the size of the price, they're evaluating the size of the difference between this price and the expected price. So here, you want this gap to seem as large as possible. And a visually larger price might instill this perception. When customers look at the price, they think, how much cheaper is this price? Something feels big, so the gap must be big. We could keep dissecting this mechanism, but here's the general takeaway. If your prices are competitive, then visually enlarge them. If you're not competitive, then visually de-emphasize them. Next, duration, like a monthly billing duration. Generally, place this duration below the price. If you place it next to the price, you provide a visual reference point that makes the adjacent price feel visually larger. And it also makes it harder to compare prices across plans. Instead of comparing digits versus digits, users need to carry this extra information in their working memory while comparing prices. Place the duration below in order to isolate these digits so that these numbers are the only elements in their working memory and attention. Next, color. Research shows that red prices are more appealing for men. But I think a more powerful adjustment would be reducing the color and opacity of the currency symbol, which reduces what's called the pain of paying. And finally, discounts. You can make these prices seem cheaper by adding a larger crossed out price above. Only do this if these numbers are actually legitimate. But here's how I might approach it. you visually enlarge this top number so that the price below looks visually smaller by comparison. You still need their attention on this smaller number, so I reduce the opacity of this top number while adding red to this price below. This also helps with what I call contrast fluency. For example, infomercials depict problems in black and white, yet they depict the solution in vivid color. Viewers think, something feels different, therefore the product must make a big difference. Same thing here. A stronger visual difference will imply a stronger conceptual and numerical difference. And you might have noticed that I space these numbers apart. If there's a larger visual gap, your brain perceives a larger numerical gap. I tried to strengthen this effect by adding a thin line, which might prime the idea of a number line. And notice that I positioned the original price above. These numbers are easier to subtract because of the digit by digit comparison. But if your discount isn't favorable, you might want to align these numbers horizontally to impede this subtraction. And these two numbers, 50 and 25, should be especially effective because of the ease of computation effect. The gap between two numbers feels larger if these numbers are easy to subtract. And that makes sense. In the sensory world, if something is very easy to notice, it's usually large. So if this numerical difference is easy to notice, subconsciously it just feels larger because of our sensory experience. And there's an added benefit because 50 is divisible by 25. In one study, a $24 pizza seemed better with two multiples of that price nearby. Something just felt right, and customers concluded that they wanted to buy pizza. I'd be curious whether this effect happens with a combination like 100 and 49. I suspect that it would still happen, but probably to a weaker extent. So those are some pricing tricks based on psychology. You can download my PDF for a summary, as well as many other principles that we didn't cover. And you can always break these guidelines. I'm not sold on this design with the discounted price. I might shrink this price above, even though it visually enlarges the price below. I think the clarity of this new design would be more effective. So always use your judgment when incorporating these principles. But to summarize, if I had to design a pricing page, I might incorporate a lot of white so that prices feel lighter, add no more than 3 to 4 plans, keep plans above the fold with the same height and close together, insert a graphic behind them so that they feel physically closer to the user, and ideally it should be a physical texture so that it primes a sensory feeling. Position prices near the top of plans so that they feel lighter. Reduce the leftmost digit as much as possible. Isolate these digits by positioning durations below them. And finally, add a thin line above these buttons to consolidate all of the attention on this action.